I always forget just how tight The Terminator is as a film. There is not an ounce of fat on it. Everything serves the plot, and at the same time informs on character or bears up to some examination as a statement on the world of 1984 and the eventual future war that would be our downfall. It races by like a juggernaut. Scenes I know frame by frame are still somehow able to cause tension. It has a circular structure. We start in 2029 with a ravaged world. The mournful credits roll by with that wonderful thread of hope struggling through the center of the melody. Now this sums up the Terminator series at its best. Whether or not fate can be changed, the heroes are always aware of the terrible possible future, which for many of them is their past. And instead of crumbling, going into hiding, or committing suicide from the madness this near certainty of extinction brings, they fight. The events of the film play themselves out with the literal seeds for hope in the future being delivered. The price is unbearably high, yet so small scale that only Sarah is left to mourn. She then drives off into the future, grimly determined to do her best. There is so much of value here. It's smart and heartfelt and pulls no punches. Even the bad special effects are good, and the good ones are fantastic. The score roots it in its day and occasionally goes overboard, leaving you feeling like you're being serenaded by electronic synth wails inside the Tron arcade cabinet. It's by no means as cinematic, as epic in scale, as accessible, as wonderfully acted, or as exciting as its sequel. A film that pretty much lands on perfection for me. But for something we must remember that came out of nowhere and cost nothing, it is maybe more significant. Cameron, having seen Star Wars and decided he was going to work in movies at any cost, found himself in Roger Corman's stable of grubby, zero-budget exploitation schlockers. He directed Piranha 2: The Spawning, and was, in the early 1980s, sleeping on other people's floors and eating fast food every other day to stay alive. Thanks to the support of Gail Ann Hurd, his script, penned after a particularly intense dream, got picked up by Orion Pictures, though the executives had little faith in him or understanding of what they had on their hands. Cameron was shooting scenes from The Terminator guerrilla style, on locations without permits in order to get the thing made, and had a cast or crew member die due to an accident, the world would never have heard of this man. Or The Terminator, which would mean 80s and 90s comics would have had a lot fewer cyborgs and soldiers from dark futures. Alien would have had a very different sequel, which would have had a knock-on effect on video games history. The Titanic would have had a different recreation, and someone else would have had to bring 3D, kicking and screaming, back to cinema. In other words, his influence web cannot be unpicked. This man, difficult as he is to work with, or indeed conduct a relationship with, is a touchstone of popular culture extending far beyond his chosen medium. In The Terminator, Kyle Reese is played with damaged intensity by Michael Biehn. Like Luke Skywalker selling us Yoda in Empire, he is the one to convince first us, and then Sarah, that this machine is unstoppable and terrifyingly dangerous. Schwarzenegger obliges by being incredibly steady and threatening, achieving a hell of a lot with simply a dead-eyed stare and brushing off attacks from regular humans. It doesn't hurt that he has a body that, and this is my favourite Clive James description, I think I used it when we reviewed Predator, resembles a condom full of walnuts. He is a perfect physical specimen. Too perfect. Too hard-looking. His emotions played so slight that they are indicative more of computation and readjustment. And then there's Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor, a girl who goes from a bushy-haired, hapless waitress to a sombre and determined soldier, a tenacious survivor, and an incredibly powerful icon for assertive women everywhere. Like Ellen Ripley, a character who Cameron loved so much in Alien, he integrated aspects of her into Sarah, only then to take up and redefine 2 years later. Sarah is a woman as iconic as her own name. It is a name that paints a picture in the minds of the viewers every time it is spoken. Resilient, determined. These are not qualities she shows in her everyday life. They have to be brought out of her, tortured even. This is her trial by fire. She is reliant at first upon a support network of friends, family and police, civilization, all of them are stripped away one by one. In fact, her very reliance on them puts her at a disadvantage, giving herself away and putting herself on the Terminator's map. At the close, she has left all of this behind. Everyone is dead. Even her lifeline, the soldier that embodies a living paradox. All of it is gone, leaving her a Cassandra in a world about to end. Not only that, but knowing how important her unborn child is, she literally cannot give up. Condemned to a life without rest or true safety, without ever being able to carve out her own path in the public eye, and knowing that her son will suffer the same fate. She has to sacrifice everything, a true hero not one of us would trade places with, but all of us respect. A ghost in the machine.
Terminator 2 Judgment Day was one of the first films I owned on VHS and became fascinated enough with to watch over and over again. Then I saw the original Terminator late night on TV, taped it, and watched that over and over again too. The story became ingrained enough for me that Sarah Connor was one of the most key fictional role models I had as a teenager. The tone of both films, especially the first one, perfectly fit the emotional detachment that seemed to be the only way I could safely interact with the world, yet left me longing to indulge the intensity of feeling that my brain was screaming for. There are numerous levels and angles that can be approached when interpreting the world of the Terminators. Part, I have no doubt, of why this $6.4 million picture, which the studio initially tried to sell purely as an action exploitation flick, went on to cement James Cameron as one of the most bankable directors in Hollywood. Personally, I like the idea that although it is ostensibly a cautionary tale about over-reliance on technology, in actual fact, it can be read as cautioning against the fear of over-reliance on technology, since the nature of fear is such that the more you resist it, the more likely it is to bite you in the arse. Skynet doesn't come from nowhere, humans create it, and its seed is the future resistance's determination to crush it utterly. The most power this pair of films has for me, though, is as a psychological parable on protecting the self, Carl Jung's term for a reconciled whole person whose emotions and perceptions are able to interact healthily with each other, from the shadow, a complex of coping and defense mechanisms that have become distorted, negatively affecting the integrity of the self and damaging its ability to respond appropriately to threats. The idea came to Cameron while he was battling with a severe bout of food poisoning in Paris and dreamed that a robotic assassin was pursuing him. I'm reluctant to speculate what this might imply about Cameron's response to feeling isolated and out of control in his own body, which food poisoning has a tendency to evoke in my experience, but the story that ensued has a lot to say about being attacked by your own defences, and how this can be faced without succumbing to utter collapse. Beginning in the wasteland of human consciousness that is Los Angeles 2029, the film presents a world which is dying. The landscape is littered with skulls and human bones, showing that Skynet has reduced humanity, representing the psyche, to a skeletal framework and is even trying to return that unto dust. We are under threat of extinction from the very thing we created for our own protection. The subtitle of the third film, Rise of the Machines, is something of a misnomer, because machines do only what they are programmed to do by their creators. They don't act out of hate because they don't fear. They don't fear because they aren't driven by a desperation to survive. But the shadow is, because it is a product of the human mind, and so is Skynet. Once the power to protect the ego, the raw, vulnerable part of the psyche, is entirely handed over to the shadow, we are no longer dealing with flexible, useful, controlled defence mechanisms, but with life that has taken a form unrecognisable to the developing self, perceives it as a threat, and is antagonistic to its continuation. But Skynet's attempt has failed. The resistance, led by their saviour John Connor, and I don't think anyone's ever queried the blatant symbolism of his initials, has smashed the defence grid, and soon they will swarm over the shadow and end its self-awareness. We can hope they will use the component parts to rebuild humanity, rather than simply crushing it and rejecting all technology, which would inevitably result in the creation of another shadow at the opposite end of the spectrum. But that's a story for another time. The only hope Skynet has to save itself now is to reach back into the dim and distant past and attack Connor's parents. And, since we know a time loop is created, meaning that these actions have always been going to have happened, this can be viewed as a psychological attempt to pick apart the events that have led to the development of the shadow and caused threat to the self's progression in the first place. A simple psychological premise is thus constructed. Sarah Connor can be perceived as the anima of this self, the life-giving principle who will ultimately give birth to, raise and train its mean to defeat the shadow complex. The soldier sent back in time to protect her, Kyle Reese, is the animus, the warrior who connects the self to the outside world, loves it and defends it when it is threatened. Traditionally, the anima is considered to appear only in the psyches of men, resulting from the obligatory repression of qualities considered feminine within a societal culture which requires its boys to curb their instinctive empathy so they can be sent to war. The reverse is thought true for the animus, the impact of shaming women into leaving themselves defenceless and unprotected so that their vulnerability can be used as a tool to leverage the boys' repression. My view, however, is that this is a perception made through the distorted glass of the very society that imposes these repressions and uses gender binaries to reinforce them. I believe that all psyches contain both anima and animus, and that the individual should be free to respond to the innate impulses that balance these in their own unique way. So I am always delighted when a piece of fiction has a protagonist team incorporating male and female characters and shows them as equally vital to a thriving existence. And so the scene is set. The anima-animus couple are to be pursued by the shadow as it attempts to preserve its relevance and prevent the birth of the child self that will reconcile humanity. Their battle will not be easy. They will be subject to isolation and fear, and the outcome, it seems, is both uncertain and set in stone. But with the belief that there is no fate but what we make for ourselves, they may just be able to ensure that they will one day be whole.